The initial sweep of Operation Barbarossa in 1941 cemented a deep-seated arrogance within the German officer corps regarding Soviet military hardware. Their superior training and the tactical success of the Blitzkrieg methodology convinced them that Red Army (RA) technology was inherently inferior. Early encounters with Soviet armor, particularly the ubiquitous T-34, briefly shocked them, but soon the feeling of German technical mastery was restored. Many German officers openly mocked the crude welding and simplistic design philosophy of the mass-produced Soviet tanks. The prevailing German view was that while the Soviets could field vast numbers of vehicles, those vehicles lacked the precision engineering and high-quality optics essential for modern mechanized warfare. They believed their own tanks, like the Panzer III and Panzer IV, were demonstrably better across the board in terms of crew comfort, operational reliability, and, crucially, armor penetration capabilities. This complacency was rooted in a rapid, almost effortless advance deep into Soviet territory during the first months of the invasion. They failed to appreciate the raw potential for rapid wartime innovation and the Soviet commitment to prioritizing firepower and protection over finesse. The German military intelligence discounted early reports of exceptional Soviet designs, often viewing them as isolated anomalies rather than indicators of a coming shift. This failure of imagination would become one of the costliest misjudgments of the Eastern Front campaign. Their early battlefield victories created a veil of overconfidence that blinded them to the true scale of the Soviet industrial effort. It was an arrogance born of initial success against a reeling, but not broken, enemy. This period was characterized by a distinct feeling of technical superiority that permeated every level of the Wehrmacht. German tank crews felt almost invincible, especially once they were equipped with the more powerful long-barreled guns. The mockery of Stalin's tractors was commonplace in mess halls and operational briefings. This scorn would linger for years, making the eventual shock all the more profound when that perceived inferiority suddenly unleashed a brutal, unstoppable force. The very concept of a Soviet tank being an existential threat seemed ludicrous to many high-ranking German commanders. They relied too heavily on the notion that their complex, advanced designs would always win out against the Soviet doctrine of overwhelming, simple force. This underestimation laid the groundwork for a devastating and demoralizing surprise when the heavy-hitting Soviet tanks finally arrived. The entire early perception of the war on the Eastern Front was skewed by this dismissive view of the Red Army's industrial might. This period of mocking became a historical prelude to a shocking reversal of fortune on the battlefields of 1943 and beyond. Their initial technological lead proved to be a fleeting advantage that the Soviets were determined to nullify through sheer, brutal necessity and an uncompromising approach to firepower. The deployment of the Panzerkampfwagen 6 OSV, better known as the Tiger I, fundamentally changed the nature of tank warfare on the Eastern Front. Its introduction was a direct response to the powerful Soviet T-34 and KV series tanks encountered in 1941. The Tiger represented a massive leap in German tank design, prioritizing protection and firepower above all else. It boasted 100 millimeters of thick, nearly vertical armor on its front hull, which was essentially impervious to the standard Soviet 76 mm anti-tank guns at all but the closest ranges. This unprecedented protection gave German crews a terrifying psychological advantage in every engagement. The tank's offensive power was derived from the formidable 8.8 centimeters KWK 36L/56 main gun, a derivative of the legendary German anti-aircraft cannon. This gun could effortlessly penetrate the armor of any Soviet tank, then in service from ranges previously unimaginable in tank-to-tank combat. It effectively extended the German engagement range far beyond the reach of the Red Army's contemporary weapons. For Soviet tank crews, the Tiger became an almost mythical, indestructible behemoth that suddenly appeared and dispatched their vehicles with contemptuous ease. Its presence on the battlefield became a morale killer, instilling fear in every encounter. German doctrine shifted to utilize the Tiger as a powerful psychological and strategic weapon, often used to anchor defensive lines or spearhead crucial counterattacks. The tank's early operational use was a series of tactical victories, often resulting in kill ratios wildly disproportionate to its own losses. This performance further reinforced the German belief in the absolute superiority of their heavy armor concepts. The very design of the Tiger reflected an engineering approach that favored complexity and high performance, regardless of the difficulty in manufacturing or maintenance. Its massive weight and powerful engine meant that moving it across the poor Soviet infrastructure was a logistical nightmare, but its combat performance often justified the headaches. The Tiger's appearance on the battlefield in late 1942 and early 1943 marked the zenith of German tank design confidence. The German crews felt a sense of invincibility, secure inside their fortress of steel, knowing that the vast majority of Soviet rounds would simply bounce off. They could pick and choose their targets, engaging the enemy from safety and distance. The initial mocking of Soviet armor was now replaced by a condescending acknowledgement that the Red Army simply did not possess the means to defeat the Tiger. This period of dominance was not destined to last, but its impact on the early to mid-war Eastern Front was profound and one-sided. The sheer difficulty in destroying a Tiger forced the Soviets to completely rethink their anti-tank and artillery tactics. They desperately needed a weapon that could not just challenge the Tiger, but reliably and brutally destroy it. The sudden, brutal effectiveness of the German Tiger and later the Panther tank created an immediate and profound crisis within the Red Army High Command. Existing Soviet anti-tank guns and tank armaments were rendered obsolete overnight, unable to consistently defeat the new thick-skinned German heavyweights. The standard 76mm guns of the T-34 and KV-1, the backbone of the Soviet tank force, were simply not up to the task at combat ranges. Field reports indicated a devastating pattern where Soviet formations were decimated by German heavy tanks firing from outside their own effective range. The crisis demanded a rapid and decisive industrial and engineering response to prevent a catastrophic loss of armored superiority. The Soviet philosophy, however, focused on expediency and mass production rather than the complex, drawn-out development cycles favored by the Germans. Stavka, the Soviet Supreme Command, issued an urgent decree for the immediate development of a powerful new self-propelled gun, SPG, capable of defeating the new beasts, the Tigers and Panthers. The engineers tasked with this challenge were forced to work under immense pressure and impossible deadlines. Their solution needed to be simple enough for rapid mass production in the shattered and relocated Soviet industrial base. It also had to be a design that leveraged existing, reliable chassis to minimize development time and training needs. The existing KV heavy tank chassis, though somewhat dated, provided a robust platform capable of handling a significant recoil force. The primary requirement was not necessarily an elegant design, but an expedient mobile gun carriage packing the largest possible anti-tank punch. There was no time for developing a new, high-velocity anti-tank gun of comparable performance to the German 88 millimeters. Instead, the Soviet designers looked to their existing, powerful, but unconventional artillery pieces. The immense pressure from the frontline units struggling against the Tiger meant that theoretical perfection was willingly sacrificed for immediate battlefield effectiveness. This crisis was a crucible that forged a new generation of Soviet heavy armor designs. The Soviet industrial machine, often mocked by the Germans for its perceived crudeness, was about to demonstrate its true strength: the ability to rapidly convert an urgent battlefield necessity into a devastating, mass-produced reality. The sheer scale of the threat meant that compromise was a luxury the Red Army could not afford. They needed a shock weapon, a devastating answer that would restore the confidence of their crews and shatter the morale of the Wehrmacht. This concentrated effort on the most potent counterweapon possible directly led to the birth of the machine that would change the dynamics of the heavy tank battle. The result of the Soviet emergency design program was the self-propelled gun SU-152, a vehicle born of necessity, speed, and brutal practicality. The project began in late 1942 and moved from drawing board to prototype with astonishing rapidity, a testament to the Soviet commitment to wartime production efficiency. It utilized the well-tested and robust chassis of the KV-1S heavy tank, which provided the necessary stability and load-bearing capacity for the immense gun. The primary design challenge was fitting the massive 152 mm 20 howitzer gun into a fixed, armored casemate structure. This resulted in a rather simple, boxy superstructure that was bolted and welded onto the KV-1S hull. The fixed nature of the casemate meant the entire vehicle had to be turned to aim, a tactical disadvantage that was accepted in exchange for a lower profile and a simpler, faster manufacturing process. The armor protection was functional, with a thick gun mantlet providing good frontal defense, capable of shrugging off smaller anti-tank rounds. However, the real heart of the new machine was its colossal main armament, the 152 mm howitzer. This gun was not initially designed as a dedicated anti-tank weapon, but rather as heavy field artillery for busting bunkers and fortifications. Its selection was a pragmatic choice because it was a mature, powerful weapon already in production and readily available. The SU-152's official designation was merely a technical description, but its combat debut would soon earn it a far more fearsome and memorable nickname. The initial prototype, designated KV-14, was finalized and tested in a remarkably short period, passing its trials despite some expected issues with the gun's immense recoil. The order for mass production was immediately given, even before the Battle of Kursk, demonstrating the urgent need perceived by the high command. This self-propelled gun was not intended for the elegant, long-range tank duels favored by the Germans. Instead, the SU-152 was designed as a brute force solution, a mobile artillery piece capable of delivering an overwhelming and decisive blow. Its entire existence was a direct and unsubtle response to the perceived invulnerability of the German heavy tanks. It was a machine that perfectly embodied the Soviet wartime industrial spirit. Simple, rugged, and possessing disproportionate, war-winning firepower. The 152 mm ML 20S howitzer gun mounted in the SU-152 was a weapon of unparalleled destructive force in the mobile anti-tank arena. Its primary ammunition was a heavy high-explosive, or HE, shell weighing an enormous 48.7 kilograms. While it could also fire an armor-piercing projectile, the sheer destructive power of the HE round against heavy armor proved to be the SU-152's signature feature. When this massive HE shell struck the thick, hardened steel of a German Tiger or Panther, the effect was unlike that of any conventional anti-tank weapon. A typical kinetic energy round, like the German 88 mm, relied on penetrating the armor and causing damage inside the tank with the projectile itself. The 152 mm HE round, even if it failed to fully penetrate, transferred a cataclysmic amount of kinetic energy and explosive force upon impact. This enormous concussion would often shear off bolts, buckle armor plates, and cause massive internal damage from what is known as spalling. Spalling occurs when the explosive shock wave travels through the armor, causing flakes or shards of steel to break off the inner surface and fly through the crew compartment at high velocity. These metal fragments acted like a lethal, internal shrapnel shower, instantly incapacitating the crew, damaging instruments, and detonating ready ammunition. The blast effect was also known to violently rip the Tiger's heavy turret from its ring, a truly horrifying and demoralizing spectacle for German crews. This damage was so extensive that even if the crew survived the initial hit, the tank was immediately rendered combat ineffective and required major, time-consuming field repair. The gun's versatility also allowed it to be incredibly effective in its secondary role as a heavy artillery piece against infantry and fortified positions. Its tremendous destructive radius made it a potent weapon for clearing stubborn defensive zones. The ability to fire such a massive shell, however, came with significant drawbacks, including a very low rate of fire and a limited onboard ammunition supply. Despite these operational limitations, the power of the 152 mm ML 20S meant that a single hit was often sufficient to destroy or utterly disable any German vehicle it encountered. The SU-152, therefore, was not a precision instrument but a mobile wrecking ball designed to deliver a single, overwhelming punch. The massive Battle of Kursk in the summer of 1943 provided the proving ground and the true baptism of fire for the newly deployed SU-152s. It was the largest tank battle in history, and it was here that the German faith in the invulnerability of their heavy tanks was severely tested. The SU-152s were organized into separate heavy self-propelled artillery regiments and were deployed specifically to counter the expected onslaught of German heavy armor. They were typically held in reserve or positioned in ambush roles, blending into the defensive lines to await the arrival of the formidable Tiger and Panther formations. The first reports of the SU-152's effectiveness quickly filtered through the front lines, causing disbelief and then alarm in the German command structure. It was during these furious engagements that the Soviet crews demonstrated the brutal efficiency of the 152 mm high-explosive round. Eyewitness accounts from both sides spoke of the horrific damage inflicted by the Soviet self-propelled gun. Tigers and Panthers that had shrugged off countless 76 mm rounds were suddenly being knocked out by a single, tremendous impact that often left the vehicle a smoking, ruined wreck. The sheer force of the explosion was enough to cause structural failures, even against the thickest armor. The Soviet tactics were simple yet effective. Wait for the target to close, and then fire the devastating shell for maximum concussive effect. The SU-152 regiments operated with a grim determination, fully aware of their importance in stemming the German heavy tank tide. Kursk became the place where the German officers' early mockery of Soviet armor truly died. They realized that the Red Army had found a simple, if blunt, answer to their most advanced armored vehicles. The SU-152, despite its fixed gun and slow rate of fire, was successfully achieving what dedicated anti-tank guns could not: reliable destruction of the Tiger. Its performance was a major factor in restoring the confidence of the Soviet troops, who had previously felt outmatched by the German heavy tanks. The battle solidified the reputation of the SU-152 as a tank killer of the highest order. This initial, bloody deployment ensured the self-propelled gun's future role and continued production throughout the rest of the war. The Soviet High Command had found its necessary, immediate solution to the German armored threat. The devastating performance of the SU-152 during the Battle of Kursk quickly earned it an unofficial, yet indelible, nickname among the Red Army tank crews. They began calling it the Zveroboy, a Russian word which translates powerfully to beast killer or animal hunter. This moniker was a direct and proud reference to the SU-152's primary victims, the German beasts, the Tiger and Panther tanks. The adoption of this nickname was a profound psychological marker for the Soviet forces, representing a massive shift in battlefield parity. Before the Zveroboy, the names Tiger and Panther evoked fear and a sense of impossible challenge for the average Soviet crewman. After Kursk, the name Zveroboy began to represent vengeance, a reliable and available counterweapon that restored the balance of power. The nickname quickly spread through the ranks, becoming a badge of honor for the crews operating the imposing self-propelled guns. It was a source of immense pride to be the man in the machine designed explicitly to destroy the enemy's most feared weapons. The German side also learned the name with a mixture of fear and respect, recognizing the distinct threat posed by the squat, heavy vehicle. The sound of the 152 mm gun, with its deep and unmistakable roar, became a terrifying signature on the battlefield. German tank crews soon began to prioritize the destruction of any SU-152 they encountered, knowing the potential cost of ignoring it. The psychological impact of the Zveroboy was arguably as important as its physical firepower. It signaled to both sides that the era of German tank invulnerability was officially over. The Soviet Union was not just matching German armor, but was now fielding weapons that could decisively and brutally overwhelm it. The machine's rugged, unrefined appearance belied its profound strategic value as a symbol of Soviet industrial resilience and tactical ingenuity. The name Zveroboy became synonymous with the brutal, pragmatic effectiveness of Soviet military design philosophy. It represented a turning point where the Red Army ceased merely reacting to German armored innovation and began to dictate the terms of engagement. This simple, powerful nickname summarized the entire journey from mockery to mastery on the Eastern Front. The SU-152's effectiveness hinges on a critical distinction between kinetic energy, ki, rounds, and its massive high explosive, he, projectiles. Traditional anti-tank warfare relied on KE rounds, such as armor-piercing capped ballistic capped APCBC shells, which needed to physically puncture the enemy's armor plate. The German 88 mm gun excelled at this, relying on high velocity and a dense, hardened core to defeat the steel of Soviet tanks. However, the Tiger's armor, especially its thick frontal plate, made deep penetration a marginal possibility for most Soviet KE rounds. The SU-152 largely bypassed this entire penetration paradigm by utilizing its tremendous 152 mm He shell in an anti-tank role. The high explosive round's power did not rely on punching a small hole through the armor. Instead, the shell detonated on the surface, unleashing an enormous, localized shockwave and blast furnace of energy. This concussive force alone was often sufficient to cause catastrophic structural damage to the target vehicle. The sheer energy transfer was enough to compromise the integrity of the welded seams and bolted connections of the Tiger's heavy armor. Even a non-penetrating hit could destroy the external optics, wreck the transmission, jam the turret ring, or collapse the driver's station. Most lethally, the heat blast induced the phenomenon of spalling on the inside of the armor. The explosive shockwave would travel through the metal, causing large, jagged chunks of steel from the interior surface to break away. These fragments flew inward, instantly killing or maiming the crew, igniting fuel, or detonating internal ammunition racks. It was a guaranteed kill mechanism, independent of whether the shell actually pierced the external plate. The He shells also carried a much larger quantity of explosive filler compared to dedicated armor-piercing rounds. This meant the secondary damage from the blast and fire was exponentially greater than that caused by a small, high-velocity projectile. The SU-152's He rounds were a crude but highly reliable method of neutralizing any armored target, turning the enemy's own mass against itself. This tactical utilization of a common artillery shell as a tank destroyer weapon was a defining Soviet improvisation. It proved that pure, overwhelming power could trump the sophistication of specialized armor-piercing designs. The appearance of the SU-152 on the battlefield had a profound and immediately demoralizing psychological impact on the German tank crews. Before its arrival, German heavy tank crews, particularly those in the Tigers, felt practically invulnerable to all but the heaviest and most perfectly aimed Soviet fire. The sense of security provided by their 100 mm frontal armor was a major morale booster, contributing to aggressive tactics. The Zveroboy shattered this illusion of safety with its very first kills. The nature of the SU-152's destruction was unlike anything they had previously experienced. Instead of a clean penetration kill, the 152 mm He rounds inflicted savage, debilitating damage that was both shocking and visible from a distance. Reports of Tiger turrets being completely blown off their mountings or hulls being massively distorted spread quickly through the Wehrmacht. This visual evidence of overwhelming force undermined the very foundation of the German heavy tank doctrine. The crews began to realize that no amount of armor thickness could fully protect them from the sheer concussive power of the Zveroboy's massive shell. Every distant, deep artillery roar now carried the potential to be a fatal blow aimed directly at their vehicle. This fear led to greater caution, forcing German commanders to adopt more defensive and less effective tactics. The German crew's confidence suffered a severe blow, replaced by a constant state of anxiety on the front line. The Soviet side, conversely, experienced a massive and immediate boost to morale. Knowing they had a weapon capable of reliably destroying the enemy's most feared vehicles instilled a renewed fighting spirit. The SU-152 became a symbol of Soviet industrial power, finally delivering a decisive answer to German technological superiority. The psychological warfare waged by the 152 mm howitzer was a critical, if unquantifiable, component of the SU-152's overall success. It was a weapon that destroyed not just tanks, but also the confidence of the men operating them. The sound of the Zveroboy firing was the sound of the pendulum of power swinging decisively on the Eastern Front. Specific engagements involving the SU-152 and the Tiger tank became legendary on the Eastern Front, confirming the self-propelled gun's deadly reputation. One of the most famous early encounters took place during the fighting around Kursk, where a small unit of Zveroboy was tasked with holding a vital sector. They positioned themselves in well-concealed ambush spots, waiting for the German armored spearhead to commit to the attack. When a column of Tigers advanced, the SU-152s waited until the targets were well within their effective range before unleashing their devastating fire. The sheer shock of the 152 mm He shells hitting the massive German tanks was often enough to stop them instantly. A single direct hit on the Tiger's side or rear could cause catastrophic penetration and immediate destruction. However, even frontal hits often proved decisive by destroying the complex final drive or jamming the large turret with the sheer force of impact. The Tiger, designed for long-range duels, was suddenly being challenged at close quarters by a weapon that nullified its main advantage: thick armor. The Soviet crews were trained to target the vulnerable, unsloped parts of the Tiger's chassis, particularly the gun mantlet or the engine deck. In one documented case, an SU-152 scored a frontal hit on a Tiger, and though the shell did not penetrate, the concussion was so immense that the tank's radio equipment was shredded. The blast also warped the forward transmission, forcing the entire crew to abandon their now immobile, combat-useless vehicle. The success of the SU-152 lay not in its armor-piercing capabilities, but in the brutal application of explosive force against a highly complex machine. Every component, from the engine to the delicate optics, was susceptible to the enormous shockwave generated by the massive shell. The sheer destructive power of the He round meant that even a near miss could disable the Tiger's tracks or severely wound the exposed crew commander. The SU-152 proved that simplicity and overwhelming firepower, applied correctly, were the perfect antidote to the German philosophy of advanced, yet fragile, engineering. It systematically began to dismantle the German perception of armored superiority piece by piece, or rather, tank by tank. While the SU-152 earned its fame and the nickname Zveroboy for its decisive actions against the Tiger tank, its utility extended far beyond this single opponent. The self-propelled gun proved to be an equally fearsome adversary to all types of German heavy and medium armor. Its massive 152 mm howitzer was just as effective against the formidable frontal armor of the Panther tank. The Panther, with its excellent sloped armor, was often considered a more difficult target for traditional anti-tank rounds than the Tiger. However, the concussive power of the SU-152's He shell rendered the sloping of the armor largely irrelevant to the devastating spalling effect. The SU-152 also saw extensive action against the massive Ferdinand, later Elephant, tank destroyer, which boasted incredible frontal armor. Against such a well-protected, slow-moving target, the SU-152 often took on the role of heavy assault artillery, cracking its armor with powerful hits. Its high-explosive round could find and exploit weak points in the Ferdinand superstructure, or simply cause paralyzing damage to the tracks or running gear. It was a vital tool for the Soviet forces in urban combat, where its large-caliber shell was perfectly suited for demolishing fortified buildings and strongpoints. The Su-152 could transform a concrete bunker into rubble with just a few well-aimed shots. Its usefulness as a general-purpose heavy assault gun ensured its continued relevance even as newer Soviet tank destroyers were introduced. The versatility of the 152 mm howitzer meant that the vehicle was never without a viable target on the battlefield. From annihilating the most heavily armored German tanks to clearing the path for infantry, the Su-152 was a multi-role instrument of brute force. Its consistent performance against every type of German heavy vehicle cemented its reputation as a highly valued asset throughout the rest of the war. The Zveroboy was a universal solution to the German heavy armor problem, regardless of the opponent's specific design or designation. The Su-152's period of mass production was relatively brief, as it was soon superseded by the more refined and slightly less massive ISU-152. However, its impact on the course of the war and the future of Soviet military design is undeniable and enduring. The Zveroboy immediately filled the critical gap in Soviet anti-tank capabilities when the Tiger first appeared, preventing a potential disaster. It demonstrated the successful Soviet model of industrial pragmatism, adapting existing, reliable components for rapid battlefield deployment. The idea of mounting a massive, short-barreled artillery piece onto a mobile, armored chassis proved to be a highly effective doctrine. This concept laid the groundwork for the highly successful ISU-152, which utilized the same gun and the new IS heavy tank chassis. The ISU-152 would go on to be one of the most feared and respected Soviet vehicles for the remainder of the conflict. The Su-152 forever changed the German perception of Soviet armor, replacing the initial derision with genuine, lasting fear. It forced the German high command to fundamentally reassess their offensive and defensive armored tactics. The sheer psychological trauma inflicted by the Zveroboy was a victory in its own right, contributing to the declining morale of German tank crews. The legendary status of the Su-152 is cemented in its nickname, Zveroboy, a powerful symbol of the Red Army's ability to overcome any technological challenge. Its story serves as a historical case study in the power of simple, overwhelming force against complex, high-maintenance design. The machine's legacy is a testament to the Soviet ability to innovate under extreme pressure and deliver a battlefield solution exactly when it was most needed. The Su-152 remains a legendary vehicle, a rough-hewn, powerful machine that delivered the first decisive blow against the supposedly invincible Tiger.